On May 10, 1945, at 23:40 hours, Private First Class John Randolph McKinney settled into his tent near Dingalan Bay, Luzon, Philippines. He had just completed a 6-hour shift manning a Browning M1919 A4.30 caliber machine gun on the perimeter of Company A's defensive position. McKinney was 24 years old. He had enlisted in November 1942 from Screven County, Georgia, where he had grown up as the son of a sharecropper. His formal education ended after 3rd grade. Before the Army, he had spent his days hunting in the pine forests and swamps of southeastern Georgia, learning to track game, move quietly, and shoot accurately with whatever weapon was available. The Army had assigned him to Company A, 123rd Infantry Regiment, 33rd Infantry Division. His military occupational specialty was rifleman, though he had served various roles, including cook, during the division's campaigns across New Guinea and the Philippines. He stood 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighed approximately 150 pounds. The position near Dingalan Bay was an outpost, established to protect the division's eastern flank during operations to clear remaining Japanese forces from northern Luzon. The defensive perimeter measured roughly 200 yards in diameter. Company A, numbering approximately 180 men, had established the position 4 days earlier on May 7th. The terrain was difficult. Dense jungle pressed against the cleared perimeter. Visibility beyond 30 yards was nearly impossible during daylight. At night, it dropped to less than 10 feet. The nearest friendly unit was 3 miles south. Resupply came by narrow trail, often delayed by mud and Japanese interdiction. Intelligence indicated Japanese forces in the area, but exact numbers and locations remained unclear. The 33rd Division had been fighting in the Philippines since January. Japanese resistance had proven more determined than expected. Units that were supposed to have been destroyed kept reappearing, reformed from scattered survivors who refused to surrender. McKinney's machine gun position was critical. The M1919A4 provided the primary defensive fire for the eastern sector of the perimeter. The weapon cycled at 400-600 rounds per minute with an effective range of 100 yards. 3 men typically crewed the gun, 1 gunner, 1 assistant gunner to feed ammunition belts, and 1 ammunition bearer to manage the supply of .30-06 cartridges. McKinney had just rotated off his shift. Another 3-man crew had taken over the gun. McKinney's tent was positioned approximately 20 feet from the machine gun emplacement, close enough to respond if needed, far enough to allow rest between shifts. He kept his M1 Garand rifle with him in the tent. This was standard practice for infantry in forward positions. The M1 weighed 9.5 pounds unloaded, held an 8-round clip, and had an effective range of 500 yards. McKinney had learned to trust the weapon during months of combat. He cleaned it daily, even when exhausted. The night was humid, temperature approximately 78 degrees Fahrenheit, no moon. Sporadic rifle fire could be heard in the distance, perhaps 2 miles away, as other units engaged Japanese patrols or probes. This had become routine background noise. At 0400 hours on May 11th, the situation changed. Japanese forces had spent the previous night moving into position. Approximately 100 soldiers from a company that had been bypassed during earlier operations had identified the American outpost and planned a pre-dawn assault. Their objective was to overrun the position, destroy the American unit, and seize weapons and supplies. The attack began with infiltration. Japanese soldiers moved through the jungle in near complete silence, approaching within 15 feet of the perimeter before American sentries detected movement. By then, it was too late for an organized defensive response. Sergeant Fukutaro Mori led the initial assault element. He moved directly toward McKinney's tent, sword drawn. The tactic was deliberate: kill sleeping soldiers silently before launching the main assault, thereby creating confusion and preventing coordinated resistance. Mori threw open the tent flap and struck downward with his sword. McKinney, who had been sleeping lightly, moved instinctively. The blade cut a glancing blow across his head. severing part of his left ear. Blood immediately obscured McKinney's vision on that side. The pain was immediate, but McKinney's response was faster. He grabbed his M1 Garand, which he had positioned within arm's reach, and swung the rifle butt upward in a single motion. The steel butt plate connected with Maury's chin with sufficient force to break the jawbone. Maury staggered backward. McKinney struck again, this time at the base of Maury's skull. The Japanese sergeant dropped. McKinney heard shouting in Japanese. Grenades exploded near the machine gun position. He could see muzzle flashes throughout the perimeter. Dozens of them, indicating the attack was not limited to his sector. He moved toward the machine gun emplacement. 2 of the 3 man crew were already down, 1 wounded, 1 helping evacuate the injured man. The gun itself was silent. As McKinney reached the position, he saw why. 10 Japanese soldiers had captured the emplacement and were attempting to reverse the M1919A4 to fire into the American perimeter. McKinney did not hesitate. The tactical situation allowed no time for assessment. He was alone, facing 10 enemy soldiers at close range in darkness. The machine gun was lost. His M1 Garand held 8 rounds. He fired point blank into the cluster of soldiers around the gun. The first 3 rounds dropped 3 men. The remaining 7 turned toward him. McKinney continued firing, working the rifle as rapidly as he could acquire targets. At ranges of 10-15 feet, accuracy was not difficult. The challenge was speed. His 8th round struck the final Japanese soldier attempting to operate the machine gun. The M1's action locked open, the distinctive ping as the empty clip ejected. McKinney had perhaps 2 seconds before the remaining enemy soldiers reached him. He reversed the rifle and used it as a club. The first soldier received the buttstock to his temple. The second took the barrel across his shoulder, followed by a thrust that connected with his sternum. The third managed to raise a bayonet before McKinney struck him in the knee, dropping him, then finished with a blow to the head. 7 Japanese soldiers were dead around the machine gun. 3 more lay near the mortar position 45 yards distant. McKinney would later learn these were killed by his rifle fire during the initial exchange, though in the darkness and confusion he had not registered the longer shots. But the assault was not over. Approximately 90 Japanese soldiers remained, and they were now fully committed to overrunning the position. This is a story about 36 minutes that changed one man's life and saved an entire company. If you want to hear more forgotten accounts of individuals who faced impossible situations and responded with extraordinary competence, not superhuman powers, subscribe now. We're finding these stories in Medal of Honor citations, after action reports, and interviews before they're lost to time. McKinney assessed his situation. The M1919A4 machine gun was inoperable, damaged during the struggle for the emplacement. His own M1 Garand was empty. Japanese soldiers were advancing from multiple directions, throwing grenades and firing knee mortar rounds into the perimeter. The tactical advantage belonged to the attackers. Superior numbers, momentum, surprise, and darkness. McKinney's advantage was singular. He was defending a fixed position with available ammunition nearby. He moved. Staying in the machine gun emplacement would be fatal. The Japanese knew its location and were directing fire toward it. McKinney dropped into a nearby foxhole that had been dug as a secondary position. The hole was approximately 4 feet deep, 5 feet in diameter, with sandbags piled around the forward lip. The foxhole contained 4 additional M1 Garand rifles and approximately 80 rounds of loose-point 30 Zor-6 ammunition. This was standard practice. Defensive positions stockpiled weapons and ammunition to allow sustained fire, even if casualties occurred. McKinney grabbed the nearest rifle and loaded 8 rounds from a clip, ranged to the approaching Japanese soldiers, approximately 30 yards. He could see silhouettes moving against the slightly lighter sky. Approximately 20 of Japanese soldiers advanced toward the machine gun position and McKinney's foxhole. They moved in a loose line, firing rifles and throwing grenades as they came. The grenades were Type 97 hand grenades, approximately 1 pound, 5-second fuse, lethal radius of 25 feet. McKinney waited until the advancing soldiers were within 25 yards, then opened fire. At this range, the M1 Garand's stopping power was absolute. Each round that connected dropped a man. McKinney fired all 8 rounds in approximately 12 seconds, then reached for another loaded rifle. He did not reload the empty weapon. There was no time. He fired the second rifle until it was empty, then grabbed a third. This tactic, having multiple loaded weapons ready, allowed him to maintain a higher rate of fire than reloading would permit. The first wave faltered. 7 Japanese soldiers lay dead or wounded between the foxhole and the tree line. The survivors withdrew into the jungle. Elapsed time approximately 4 minutes. McKinney used the pause to reload the empty rifles. His hands moved automatically, the result of countless repetitions during training and combat. Insert clip. Close action. Ready. The process took 8–10 seconds per weapon. The Japanese adjusted their tactics. Rather than a frontal assault, they attempted to flank the position. Approximately 15 soldiers moved through the jungle to McKinney's right, attempting to approach from an angle that would limit his field of fire. McKinney heard movement in the vegetation. He shifted position within the foxhole to face the new threat. Range 20–25 yards. Visibility approximately 15 feet due to jungle density and darkness. The attacking soldiers emerged from the tree line in groups of 3 or 4, separated by a few seconds. This made them harder targets than a massed formation. McKinney engaged each group as it appeared. Fire. Acquire next target. Fire. The M1's semi-automatic action allowed rapid target switching without manual bolt operation. 3 Japanese soldiers reached within 10 feet of the foxhole. McKinney's rifle was empty. He had no time to grab another loaded weapon. The first soldier raised a bayoneted rifle. McKinney swung his empty M1 like a baseball bat. The rifle barrel connected with the soldier's weapon, deflecting it. McKinney followed with a thrust using the rifle butt, striking the soldier in the face. The second soldier was already moving forward with a bayonet. McKinney parried with his rifle, then closed distance and struck with the buttstock. The third soldier attempted to shoot, but McKinney had already moved inside his firing arc. Another strike with the rifle butt. All 3 Japanese soldiers went down. McKinney grabbed a loaded rifle from the foxhole and resumed firing at the remaining attackers. The second wave broke off. Elapsed time since beginning of second wave, approximately 6 minutes. 15 more Japanese soldiers were dead or wounded. McKinney's ammunition supply was diminishing. He had 4 loaded rifles remaining and approximately 32 loose rounds. The Japanese changed tactics again. Rather than attempting to advance under fire, they began throwing grenades from the tree line. The Type 97 grenades had an effective throwing range of 30–35 yards. By remaining in the jungle, the attackers could bombard McKinney's position while staying relatively protected. Approximately 20 grenades landed within 40 feet of McKinney's foxhole over the next 5 minutes. The explosions created a continuous barrage. Shrapnel struck the sandbags. Dirt and debris rained into the foxhole. McKinney could not return effective fire. The attackers were too well concealed. But he could not abandon the position either. The foxhole provided the only protection from the grenade fragmentation. He pressed himself against the bottom of the hole, covering his head with his arms. 1 grenade landed in the foxhole. McKinney had approximately 5 seconds. He grabbed the grenade and threw it back toward the tree line. The explosion occurred in mid-air, approximately 20 feet from the foxhole. Shrapnel peppered the ground but caused no casualties. The grenade assault stopped. Either the Japanese had exhausted their supply, or they were preparing for another ground assault. Approximately 25 of Japanese soldiers emerged from the jungle simultaneously, advancing in a rush from 3 directions. This was the largest assault yet. The objective was clearly to overwhelm McKinney through sheer numbers, to close distance so rapidly that he could not engage all the attackers before they reached his position. McKinney began firing. He worked through loaded rifles as quickly as possible, dropping each weapon when empty and grabbing the next. He prioritized targets by range closest first, then the next closest. At 20-25 yards, almost every shot connected. At 30-35 yards, his hit rate dropped to approximately 70%. 10 Japanese soldiers went down in the first 15 seconds. The survivors continued advancing. McKinney fired his last loaded rifle, 8 rounds, 6 hits. The M1's action locked open. No loaded rifles remained. McKinney grabbed loose ammunition. 16 rounds scattered in the bottom of the foxhole. He loaded 8 rounds into the nearest empty rifle. This took approximately 10 seconds. During that time, the attacking soldiers covered another 15 yards. McKinney resumed firing. The range was now 10-15 feet. He could see individual faces. He fired all 8 rounds, then had no time to reload. 3 Japanese soldiers reached the foxhole. Close combat resumed. McKinney used the empty rifle as a club and striking weapon. The confined space of the foxhole actually worked in his favor. The attacking soldiers could not surround him, and they interfered with each other as they attempted to enter the hole. He struck the first soldier with a horizontal swing of the rifle, the barrel impacting the man's ribs. Before that soldier fell, McKinney reversed the rifle and thrust upward with the buttstock, catching the second soldier under the chin. The third soldier attempted to stab downward with a bayonet. McKinney parried with the rifle barrel, then stepped forward and struck with his shoulder, knocking the soldier backward out of the foxhole. A follow-up strike with the rifle butt ended the engagement. The third wave had been repulsed. Elapsed time approximately 8 minutes. McKinney was now functioning on instinct and training. His left ear was still bleeding. Blood had soaked his uniform. Sweat obscured his vision. His hands were covered in blisters from gripping hot rifle barrels. But the tactical situation had not changed. He was alone. The position had to be held, and more Japanese soldiers remained. Japanese knee mortars began firing into the perimeter. The Type 89 grenade discharger, called a knee mortar by Americans, had a range of approximately 175 yards and fired a 50 mm projectile. 2 mortars were firing from positions in the jungle, approximately 120 yards from McKinney's foxhole. The mortar fire was not accurate. The operators likely could not see their target in the darkness and were firing based on estimated range. But the explosions were close. 1 round landed 8 feet from the foxhole, showering McKinney with dirt and debris. McKinney had 8 loaded rounds in his current rifle. He aimed toward the muzzle flashes from the mortar positions. Faint blooms of light visible in the jungle. Range approximately 120 yards. The target was not the mortar itself, but the crew operating it. He fired 5 rounds toward the first mortar position. The distinctive sound of the Type 89 firing stopped. Either he had hit the crew or forced them to take cover. He shifted aim to the second mortar position and fired 3 rounds. That mortar also went silent. Post-action analysis would later confirm that 2 Japanese soldiers lay dead next to mortar positions 45 yards apart, both with rifle wounds consistent with shots fired from McKinney's position. At 120 yards in near darkness, this represented extraordinary shooting. The Japanese launched what would be their final coordinated assault. Approximately 30 soldiers advanced from the tree line, moving more cautiously than previous waves. They had learned that charging directly into McKinney's fire resulted in casualties. Instead, they attempted to advance using fire and movement, half the force providing covering fire while the other half moved forward. McKinney had reloaded his rifle and gathered the remaining loose ammunition. He had perhaps 32 rounds total, 4 rifle loads. Against 30 attackers, the mathematics were not favorable. He fired at muzzle flashes. Soldiers who had stopped to provide covering fire were stationary targets. Each time he dropped a covering soldier. The advancing group had to stop and take up positions to continue suppressive fire. This slowed their progress and gave McKinney time to continue engaging targets. The Japanese advance stalled at 35 yards from McKinney's position. The attackers had taken cover behind trees and fallen logs. A standoff developed. McKinney could not advance. The Japanese could not safely close the distance without taking more casualties. But McKinney had one advantage. He was holding a defensive position, which meant he only needed to prevent the enemy from reaching him. The attackers needed to take the position, which required forward movement. The standoff lasted approximately 6 minutes. Occasional shots were exchanged. McKinney's ammunition was nearly exhausted. He had perhaps 16 rounds remaining. First light began to illuminate the battlefield. Visibility increased from 15 feet to 100 yards over a period of approximately 10 minutes. This changed the tactical situation fundamentally. The Japanese soldiers could now see the extent of their casualties. Approximately 40 bodies lay between the tree line and McKinney's position. They could also see that McKinney was alone, with no immediate support visible. But they could also be seen. McKinney no longer needed to fire at muzzle flashes or guess at locations. He could identify specific targets, assess range, and engage with precision. More importantly, McKinney's position was now visible to the rest of Company A. Other soldiers began moving toward his location, establishing supporting positions. The Japanese assault force recognized that reinforcements were arriving. Their window for overrunning the position had closed. The remaining Japanese soldiers withdrew into the jungle. Company A soldiers reached McKinney's foxhole. They found him standing, rifle in hand, surrounded by bodies. His uniform was soaked with blood. His own and that of enemy soldiers he had killed in hand-to-hand combat. 38 dead Japanese soldiers lay around the machine gun position and foxhole. 2 more lay near the mortar positions, 45 yards distant. McKinney had fired approximately 160 rounds from multiple M1 Garand rifles. He had killed at least 40 enemy soldiers, an average of 1 every 54 seconds for the duration of the engagement. Of these, 10 had been killed in close combat using his rifle as a club or fighting with his hands. He had sustained injuries: partial ear severed, numerous cuts and bruises, hands badly blistered. But he remained combat effective throughout the engagement. He had held the position alone for 36 minutes against an assault force that outnumbered him approximately 100 to 1. At 05:05 hours, Japanese artillery began impacting the perimeter. The artillery was not unexpected. Japanese forces often followed unsuccessful ground assaults with artillery bombardment, a tactic designed to disrupt American defensive positions and prevent reinforcement. But the timing was poor for Company A. The perimeter was already disrupted from the assault. Casualties were being evacuated. Ammunition was being redistributed. The unit was vulnerable. The artillery came from 7,500 mountain guns positioned approximately 3 miles north. These weapons had a range of 500 yards and fired high explosive shells. The bombardment was not sustained, perhaps 20 rounds over 10 minutes, but it was accurate enough to hit within the perimeter. McKinney was ordered to fall back to a more secure position. His foxhole was exposed and had been identified by the Japanese during the assault. He moved 50 yards west to a bunker that had been constructed with sandbags and logs. But the tactical situation was deteriorating. Company A was isolated. The trail to the rear had been cut by Japanese forces during the night. Resupply and evacuation were not possible. The unit was on its own with whatever ammunition and medical supplies remained after the assault. The commander assessed the situation. Company A had taken 14 casualties, 3 killed, 11 wounded. Ammunition was low. Many positions had expended 50–60% of their supply during the assault. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted treating the wounded. Food and water were rationed. The decision was made to hold the position and wait for relief. The nearest friendly unit was en route, but would not arrive for at least 8 hours. Company A would need to survive until then. McKinney was assigned to a new position on the western perimeter. His role was unchanged: defend the position against any further assault. He was given additional ammunition, 40 rounds for his M1 Garand, and a canteen of water. From Euro 600 to 1400 hours, Company A remained in defensive positions. Japanese forces probed the perimeter multiple times, but did not launch another major assault. Sporadic rifle fire and occasional mortar rounds kept the Americans alert and prevented any movement outside the perimeter. McKinney remained at his position for the entire 8 hours. The physical toll was becoming evident. The wound to his ear continued bleeding intermittently. His hands were so badly blistered that gripping his rifle was painful. Exhaustion was setting in. He had been awake for more than 30 hours. But he maintained vigilance several times during the day. He identified Japanese soldiers attempting to approach the perimeter and engaged them with rifle fire. Exact casualty counts were impossible to confirm, but his fire was effective in deterring further infiltration attempts. At 1420 hours, relief arrived. Elements of another company from the 123rd Infantry reached Company A's position. They had fought through Japanese resistance along the trail and brought ammunition, medical supplies, and reinforcements. Casualties were evacuated. McKinney was among them, not because his wounds were serious, but because he was assessed as combat ineffective due to exhaustion and injury. He was transported to an aid station 5 miles to the rear. Medical personnel treated his wounds, cleaned and bandaged the ear, treated the blisters on his hands, administered fluids. The assessment was that he would require 10 days of rest before returning to duty. He was evacuated further to a field hospital in Lingayen Gulf. The battle at Dingalan Bay was officially over. Company A had held its position. Japanese forces in the area had been significantly weakened. The 33rd Division continued operations to clear northern Luzon. McKinney's role in the defense was immediately recognized. His company commander submitted a recommendation for the Medal of Honor, supported by testimony from multiple witnesses and physical evidence at the scene. The war ended on August 15, 1945. By that time, McKinney had returned to his unit and continued serving through the occupation of Japan. He was promoted to sergeant in recognition of his actions at Dingalan Bay. On January 23, 1946, President Harry S. Truman presented McKinney with the Medal of Honor in a ceremony at the White House. The citation detailed his actions on May 11, 1945, emphasizing his individual courage and the lives he had saved through his defense of the position. McKinney did not speak extensively about the ceremony or the medal. When asked later about that day, he would only say that the president had been courteous and the ceremony had been formal. He was discharged from the Army in 1946 and returned to Scriven County, Georgia. He never married. He spent the next 51 years living quietly in the same county where he had been born. He worked various jobs: logger, hunting guide, construction worker, but spent most of his time in the woods hunting and fishing. He had minimal contact with other Medal of Honor recipients and rarely attended veterans' reunions. His Army buddies from the 33rd Division had difficulty locating him for a reunion in 1995 because he had maintained so little public presence. When they did find him, they convinced him to attend. The reunion was held to honor the division's service in the Pacific. McKinney was recognized as one of the division's most decorated soldiers. He participated reluctantly, but was clearly uncomfortable with the attention. The state of Georgia designated part of State Route 21 in Scriven County as the John R. McKinney Medal of Honor Highway in 1995. McKinney attended the dedication ceremony, but did not speak. When asked for a statement, he said only that the honor should be shared with all the men who had served. McKinney's combat at Dingalan Bay had several lasting influences on Army doctrine and training. First, his defense demonstrated the importance of individual marksmanship in close-range combat. Army training in the post-war period increasingly emphasized rapid target acquisition and engagement at ranges under 50 yards, conditions that McKinney had faced repeatedly during the 36-minute engagement. Second, his tactical decisions, particularly his movement between positions and his use of multiple pre-loaded weapons, became case studies in infantry tactics courses. The concept of defense in depth, with prepared fallback positions and pre-positioned ammunition supplies became standard practice. Third, his ability to continue fighting despite wounds and exhaustion influenced Army research into combat stress and individual resilience. His performance under extreme conditions became a benchmark for assessing soldier performance. The Medal of Honor citation itself served as teaching material. Infantry officers studied the engagement to understand how a single soldier, properly positioned and equipped, could defend against numerically superior forces through superior marksmanship, tactical awareness, and sheer determination. John McKinney died on April 5, 1997, at age 76. He is buried at Doubleheads Baptist Church Cemetery in Sylvania, Georgia. The cemetery is small, surrounded by pine woods. His grave marker identifies him as a Medal of Honor recipient, but includes no other details about his military service. There is no museum dedicated to his memory. No visitors center tells his story. The highway that bears his name passes through rural Georgia with only a small sign indicating its designation. His Medal of Honor is held by the National Museum of the United States Army at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, displayed among hundreds of other medals representing extraordinary acts of courage. The legacy of his actions on May 11, 1945, is not preserved in monuments or public ceremonies. It is preserved in the training manuals that teach infantry tactics, in the Medal of Honor citations that serve as examples of individual courage, and in the memories of the descendants of the men whose lives he saved that night. 38 enemy soldiers killed in 36 minutes, one man alone defending a position against overwhelming odds. The numbers tell part of the story, but the complete story is more complex. A sharecropper's son with a third-grade education who possessed the physical skills, mental discipline, and tactical judgment necessary to survive an impossible situation. He did not consider himself a hero. When asked in later years about the Medal of Honor, he would say that he had done what needed to be done, and that any other soldier would have done the same. This was demonstrably false. No other soldier in Company A faced what McKinney faced that night. But it revealed something about how he understood his own actions. He had been a soldier doing a soldier's job, defending his position, protecting his comrades, and surviving. That the circumstances were extraordinary did not change the fundamental nature of the task. He had responded with the skills he possessed, learned in the woods of Georgia, and refined through months of combat, and had succeeded because there was no alternative. The story matters not because it represents superhuman achievement, but because it demonstrates what human beings are capable of when training, circumstance, and necessity converge. McKinney's actions at Dingalan Bay were not inevitable or predictable, but they were possible, and they occurred, and they saved lives. That is sufficient legacy. Stories like John McKinney's exist in Medal of Honor citations, unit after action reports, and interviews with veterans conducted decades after the war. Many have never been told in detail. Many are being forgotten as the generation that lived them passes. We're working to find these accounts and present them with the documentary precision they deserve. No exaggeration, no Hollywood dramatics, just the facts of what happened and why it mattered. If you found this valuable, subscribe. There are more stories waiting in the archives. And if you want to share, where are you watching from? Does your family have military history? Do you know stories that deserve to be preserved? The comment section is below. These accounts belong to all of us. Let's make sure they're remembered.